I got a woman and a kid 200 yards out.
American Sniper is the most successful war movie of all time. But not all the drama is on the big screen. Go inside the controversy. Blockbuster, the story of American Sniper, next.
The following is a CNN special report.
Biggest weekend ever for a film in January.
American Sniper.
The greatest war movie of our time.
$300 million.
Hopefully this movie can educate those of us who aren't really familiar with the plight of a soldier and the soldier's family.
My only regrets are the guys I couldn't save. That's what keeps me up at night.
He knew he was serving a purpose. He knew he was saving lives.
Chris Kyle is now the target of not only glory, but controversy.
Did he tell the whole truth?
A propaganda film that's as authentic as Dirty Harry.
Filmmaker Michael Moore called snipers cowards.
He was a protector, always has been from the time we were little.
The trial of the man accused of killing Kyle.
American Sniper's success will impact jurors.
Good evening. I'm Allison Camerata along with Chris Cuomo. Tonight we look at the incredibly successful movie American Sniper. The film has smashed box office records, becoming the most popular war movie in U.S. history. But why?
The main reason is probably the man at the center, right? Former Navy SEAL sniper Chris Kyle. His war experience in Iraq clearly resonating with millions and not just Americans. But the Iraq War is one of the most unpopular conflicts in recent memory. So despite all the film's success, it is not without controversy. But all of this is worth a deeper look because American Sniper has quickly become more than a movie.
Get complex? I just want to get the bad guys, but if I can't see them, I can't shoot them.
The American movie that has become a national moment.
I'm ready.
Clint Eastwood's American Sniper has already raked in 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Actor for Bradley Cooper, and almost $300 million, making it the highest-grossing war film ever. It's Chris Kyle's story. The Navy SEAL known as the deadliest sniper in U.S. military history. At least 160 confirmed kills over 4 tours in Iraq.
Do you ever think that you might have seen things or done some things over there that you wish you hadn't?
Oh, that's not me, no.
What's not you?
I was just protecting my guys. The thing that haunts me are all the guys that I couldn't save.
And it is the story of what battles were fought by Kyle and others after the war that may be deepening the film's impact.
Called snipers cowards. Questions about the real-life sniper.
Hits the box office bullseye.
Controversy has followed the lionizing of Kyle as a patriot and hero. Critics question celebrating a prodigious killer and say the movie paints a largely rosy picture of America's invasion of Iraq.
I'll pick it up.
Fuel to the fire came in the familiar form of Michael Moore, who galvanized military supporters with this tweet. My uncle killed by sniper in World War II. We were taught snipers were cowards. We'll shoot you in the back. Snipers aren't heroes, and invaders are worse. The criticism started a debate. Was Chris Kyle a hero or a coward?
The very freedom that Michael Moore has is a gift that's given to him by God and protected by a strong military.
This one is just American hero. He's a psychopath patriot, and we love him.
Moore later clarified on Facebook he hadn't been referring to the movie specifically in his tweets.
You're home? What are you doing?
I guess I just needed a minute.
But there is a larger dynamic at play. Sniper explores post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, a largely underrepresented and underserved reality facing America's fighting men, women, and their families.
It's about the struggles that people go through being at war and being at home. Because more military vets are coming back than ever before because of medical advancements. And we have to take care of them.
Kyle was killed in February 2013 by Eddie Ray Routh, a U.S. veteran diagnosed with PTSD. While the two were at a Texas gun range. His murder trial is set to start this week, a reminder of the human toll at the heart of this blockbuster, a disease that plagues America's warriors. And that's a truth as real as the enduring pain Kyle's family still feels over his death.
It's sort of a picture of humanity and what we go through when we fight for something we believe in and are affected by it, and then have to fight to find our way back to each other.
So who was Chris Kyle? Let's bring in Jeff Kyle, Chris's brother and a U.S. Marine. Scott McEwen, family friend and co-author of American Sniper, and retired Major General James Spider Marks. He assigned Chris Kyle to his first mission in Iraq. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Jeff, I want to start with you. I just saw the movie yesterday. It is so powerful, so affecting, and it's impossible not to think that your brother was such an appealing guy. What did you think about Bradley Cooper's depiction of your brother? Was he just like that?
Cooper did a really good job. I think, you know, he captured most everything about Chris and put it in the movie.
Your brother was better looking, though, let's be honest.
Oh, of course.
Cooper fell a little short.
Right.
There's a scene in the movie you also served. You are a veteran, and thank you for your service. There is a scene in the movie, not early on, but when you're actually supposedly in theater and you run across each other. Did that ever really happen?
No, sir. No.
All right. So what was, because it was supposed to be portraying, you know, you're 4 years younger and you were there, you were having a hard time in the war. That's how it's portrayed.
Right.
And then your brother comes. How was your relationship? If your brother knew that you were having any kind of trouble there, what do you think he would have done?
Oh, he'd have dropped everything to do everything he could to come assist me, for sure, and vice versa.
But did you two have philosophical discussions about the war's mission?
We did. After every deployment, then we would get together, and that was our decompression time. You know, we used each other to decompress, and we talked about our missions and talked about everything that was going on, and, you know, helped each other through everything.
Scott, I want to bring you in. This movie has broken all sorts of records. It is a bonanza, the most popular American war movie ever, they call it. Why do you think it has struck such a chord with the American public?
Well, I want to say, first of all, Jeff, it's good to see you. You know, your brother really respected you and loved you, and he made it very clear that you were a very important part of his life as well. And I haven't really had the chance to tell you that, but that scene in the movie was not from the book, as you know. But I'll have my discussions with Jason about that later. Yeah, I think it's broken all records because of the fact that it really breaks down the experience of hundreds of thousands of troops that have been to battle for this country for the last 13 years. I mean, a lot of people don't realize it, but we've had back-to-back deployments by people such as Chris and Jeff and others from our military for almost 14 years now in Afghanistan and Iraq. And what we wanted to tell was not just the story of Chris, but the story of all Americans and their families that have gone to war, come home and had to deal with the deployments and the things that you have to deal with your family. And so I think it struck a nerve with a lot of different people, not just because Chris was such a patriot and such an amazing individual, but also because of the fact it's an experience that all of America has gone through, and a lot of people know a lot of people that have been through very similar things.
And it's a reality that you can't repeat enough. General, you know, the statistic about you sending him off on his mission or not, what was the reputation of the man? And tell us why you do believe and echo what Scott says, that there are a lot of soldier stories that fit this mold.
Well, there really are an immense number of incredibly personal stories. Look, I did not know Chris Kyle, but I knew thousands of Chris Kyles. The mission that he went on was really essentially started the war in Iraq. It was the gas oil platform on the northern Gulf, and we had to secure that. Our concern certainly was that Saddam was going to set it afire. So the SEALs had that mission, and Chris was on that team. So this is very personal in a whole bunch of ways. It's quite an amazing story because I think what it does is it grabs the viewer and it puts him and her in this rather fulsome experience of combat and the in and out of combat. You're in combat, then you're back home, and how do you achieve some degree of normalcy? And clearly Chris struggled with it. And I would argue that most veterans do when they come back from combat. Because in combat, you're so narrow and you're so deep, and the complications of living have just kind of been pushed and washed aside. And the real heroes are your brides that are left at home and your family members that have to deal with all of that while you fulfill your mission.
Jeff, you're nodding along as you listen to General Marks talk. What emotional condition was Chris in when he came back from these tours?
You know, he was just like the rest of us that came back. It took a toll on him. to the outsider, you couldn't tell. But to the family and, to his close friends and his teammates, I mean, yeah, because we all know, we've been there, we know what he's struggling with. And, I mean, we could tell. But
did it help you with each other? Like, you may not want to deal with what was inside you, but you saw it in him and vice versa, especially as brothers?
Right. Yeah, and like I said before, we would discuss everything after each deployment. And we would compare how, each other's deployments were and would decompress. And I think that would help us get through our next deployments.
There's this really affecting moment in the movie where another soldier tries to thank your brother for saving his life. Let's just play a little clip of that.
Are you Chief Chris Kyle?
Yes, sir.
My name is Mads. We met in Fallujah. You saved my life.
You just need to balance.
I did?
Yes, sir. We were stuck in a house until you came in with 1st Marines. You were the one that carried me out.
Oh, wow. Well, the Marines saved our ass plenty of times. How are you? You all right? You holding up?
Great, yeah. I'm just grateful to be alive.
The movie makes it seem as though that's an uncomfortable moment for him. He doesn't really want to be thanked.
He didn't, because he wasn't doing it for the thank yous. He did it because he cared about each and every one of the Americans over there and, about the citizens over there. So he wasn't doing it for all the publicity. He wasn't doing it for the thank yous. He wasn't doing it to earn the name, the legend. He did it because he actually cared, and that's what his whole mission was.
Scott, one of the challenges for you is when you were writing the book, is nobody sees themselves the way others do. And what was it, do you think, that Chris Kyle had to accept in the process of doing his story with you about himself that he may not wanted to have, ascribed to himself? What qualities of his did you have to convince him, yes, this is you?
Well, I think that Chris was very unassuming and really not even the type of guy that would want to tell his stories outside of the fact that his teammates and everyone else expressed to me that this guy really was an amazing story, and Chris got into it and started telling the different things that had taken place during his deployments, and particularly in Fallujah and Ramadi, where it was such a difficult time, not only for Chris, but the SEALs and the Marines, such as Jeff, because it was really a mess. And these guys were dropped into the middle of a firefight every day, and they really were living every day almost like a Normandy or a Iwo Jima or something of that nature, because it was firefights that were constant day after day after day. And I was amazed when I heard it and said, Chris, I think this is historical, beyond the fact that you have the most confirmed kills in United States history. What you guys went through and what you lost with the loss of Ryan Jobe and Mark Lee should be told. And I think as far as history is concerned, this is our time's battle of Normandy Beach, or battle to take the mountain at Suribachi or whatever else. And I felt like it was that historical, and I really tried to get him to talk about it even more, because of the fact that I felt it was something that really generations to come should know about, this generation of warfighter that were patriots, such as Chris and the rest of those that fought for this country. And I'm really happy that I was effective in finally getting him to do it and tell his story, because the whole part of the coming home and the family thing kind of came later. It started out first to be a story about his experiences with the men on SEAL Team 3 Charlie and the others that he fought with from the Marines. Yeah. And I feel like it was very, very important that we got that down.
Scott, Jeff, stick around if you would. General Marks, thanks so much for being on and your service and expertise. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
All right, so we're talking about Chris Kyle in terms of who he was, so you got a better handle of that now. But what mattered to him, especially when he came home, is something that is also creating this movie's momentum. We're going to tell you what that was and why he cared so much.
Hurt Locker made $17 million because it was a little ambiguous and thoughtful. And this one is just American hero. He's a psychopath patriot, and we love him. American Sniper glorifies war or simply shows one man's truth.
You just heard talk show host Bill Maher slam the movie as propaganda, but he's not alone. So let's discuss the real deal here.
We're joined again by Jeff Kyle, Chris Kyle's brother, and Scott McEwen, co-author of American Sniper. We're also joined by Sean Parnell, a U.S. Army Ranger, friend of Chris Kyle, and New York Times bestselling author of Outlaw Platoon. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Jeff, are you surprised by some of the controversy and pushback that the movie's had?
No, not at all. You know, those people are there's always going to be naysayers out there. It doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter if it's Chris or if it's somebody else. They are always going to say something derogatory about somebody else. So, you know, we did what we did for them to be able to talk their trash, so you're welcome.
So you go with the haters going to hate, and you give them that right by fighting for the freedom. Let me ask you a little bit different take on it. You're there over doing the mission. This is what you are told to do. Nobody asks you if you want to do the mission once you volunteer. Nobody asks you to discuss the merits of the mission. Do you think that's lost a little bit in this when people criticize the war, why we got in it, how we did it, how long, wind up putting the target on the fighting men and women for that criticism?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, if you watched American Sniper and you saw a political commentary on the Iraq War, or you saw, you know, a failed study on the intel surrounding the weapons of mass destruction, that you were not seeing what most of America's warriors saw, and that was like a window into the heart of the modern American warfighter. And it focuses on the struggle, not just on the battlefield, but also at home, which is critically important for Americans to understand what it's like for veterans like Jeff and I and Chris to come home.
Scott, do you think that this is a pro-war movie, an anti-war movie? What is the message?
Well, what I like about it is the fact that you can't really tell, and it's just reality, and that's what Clint and Bradley and Jason Hall did such a good job of, is you leave it for what it is, because it's the truth. It tells the truth about the American experience and the soldiers' experience, and I wouldn't categorize it as anything more than to say that if you're going to send our men and women to battle in foreign lands, then you better expect that there's going to be casualties taken, and you better give them the resources to fight and win the wars. And all I can say is that Chris and what Clint did with his story is to tell you this is what goes on. So America, we need to fight and defend this country. And if you're going to do it, then just be real about what happens when you do it, and give our men and women the resources to win the battles.
And you have to be real.
And I believe that's what this movie does a great job of.
And you have to be real with the perspective on it. I mean, Maher he's doing what he does. He's going for hyperbole there and to make some outrage. Psychopath is not just inaccurate, but it's certainly insensitive. So let's focus on Chris's own words. Put up the quote of what Chris had said that got him blowback, and I want some context from it, from those who knew him. Okay, this is obviously about the number of kills. The number's not important to me. I only wish I had killed more, not for bragging rights, but because I believe the world is a better place without savages out there taking American lives. Now, how can people take that? They can take that as, you think all Iraqis are savages. You see, he's a bigot. Do you think that's a fair reckoning of the statement?
No. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter where you're at, what war you're in. You know, yes, our era, they were Iraqis or Afghanis. You know, so yes, you have to have a certain hate for those people because they're trying to kill you. If you don't have that certain hatred for them, you're not going to come home. Any other war, the Vietnam War, those men over there, they had a hatred for the Vietnamese, and they had to. You know, that's just what we do.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think Chris was referring to the Iraqi people there. I think he was referring to the enemy that we faced. And look, they are. I mean, when I was in Afghanistan, Jeff was deployed to Iraq. We fought against an enemy that threw grenades in the cradle of newborn babies. We fought against an enemy that beheaded children, that stoned women to death. We fought against an enemy that didn't want women going to school, or they didn't want women to be educated. We fought against an enemy that gouged the eyes out of little kids and knocked their teeth out so that they would be more pleasurable in bed. Right. This enemy is evil, and the world is a better place without them. And Chris knew and understood that. The interesting thing about Chris is that he had the purest form of patriotism and love of country that I've ever seen in my entire life, and it was contagious. And I think that we need more people like that in this nation.
Jeff, what message do you think your brother would have wanted to come out of the film?
I think the message that everybody's received. It wasn't him in that movie. Every parent, every brother, every sister can put their sibling or their child in that position and see what they went through while they were in country, and then why they were who they were when they came home. You know, they weren't their little child anymore when they came home. War changes people. So I think this movie actually, it shows that. You know, it's not just Chris's story, it's every warrior out there that's ever been in combat, that's been in country and then come home. It's all of us.
Sean Parnell, Scott McEwen, and Jeff Kyle, just great to meet you. Thanks so much for sharing your story of your brother with us. We really appreciate that.
Thank y'all.
Well, you might be surprised to know that this blockbuster film had played actually in Baghdad, but not anymore. We'll tell you what went wrong next.
I got a woman and a kid 200 yards out, moving towards the convoy. Her arms aren't swinging. She's carrying something. Yeah, she's got a grenade. She's got an RKG Russian grenade. She's saying to the kid.
American Sniper not only causing some controversy at home, but overseas as well because of scenes like the one you just watched. The movie takes place in Iraq, but after just a few heated showings, the film was pulled from the only theater showing it in Baghdad.
We're joined now by Liz Sly. She's the Beirut bureau chief for the Washington Post, and she wrote a column about the reaction to American Sniper in Iraq and the government's response to it. She joins us now from Lebanon. Liz, we know that you had wanted to see the movie in Baghdad, but you couldn't. So tell us what happened.
I had arrived in Baghdad. A friend of mine told me it was playing at the mall there, and I said, wow, let's go. I wanted to see the movie. I thought it would be fun to see it in Baghdad. We got there and found it had just been pulled. So I went around and spoke to a number of Iraqis who had seen it, about their reactions, and I interviewed them about the reaction in the movie theater, but I did not actually see it myself.
And Liz, what was their reaction to this movie? I mean, we understand that it got really heated, so what did they tell you?
One showing of the movie in particular appeared to have got quite heated, with some people in the front row jumping up and shouting lies, lies at one particular point. And they wouldn't sit down. They were spoiling the view for everybody else, and some security guards came and led them away. And it was very shortly after that that the movie was pulled. And I think it might have had something to do with it, because people at the theatre were clearly very concerned that if they had continued to show the movie, there could have been some violent reaction, perhaps a retaliation, perhaps a terrorist act, something like that.
You write a scene of a child holding the grenade that we just actually played before we came into this segment. That was a flashpoint. Why? Do you think people just don't believe that could have happened? What's the reaction?
I think some people specifically told me that they had served in the military and an RPG would be too heavy for a child to lift up, and that this was therefore physically impossible. And this played into a sense that the whole movie was conveying a misperception of the Iraq War, that it wasn't telling the truth from the Iraqi point of view. And they found the whole movie, the whole portrayal of Iraqis as terrorists, as savages, that kind of thing, very, very offensive.
It's not surprising, Liz. I mean, when you watch this movie, you know, it does show Chris Kyle fighting the enemy. And the enemy is depicted as everyone that he's seeing in his world there in theater as the Iraqis. I'm surprised that it even tried to open in Baghdad, frankly.
Well, yes, I'm not surprised at all. The Iraq War was an extremely complicated war. You had Sunnis fighting with the Americans, Sunnis fighting against the Americans. You had Shia fighting with the Americans, Shia fighting against the Americans. You had Sunni and Shia fighting each other. So to portray all Iraqis as just against the Americans, not having contributed at all to the effort to bring peace to the country, I think that, yeah, I can totally understand why they found it very offensive.
And yet it does wind up being a window into how the Iraqi people see the United States. I mean, because from the U.S. perspective, the U.S. were liberators. They went there to help remove a despot and free a people. But what has the evolution been there of common sentiment?
I think Iraqis have a much more nuanced view of the war than that of America. Some of them did see the Americans as liberators. Saddam Hussein was a tyrant. But the awful bloodshed of the years that followed their invasion, the political mistakes, the huge upheaval that followed that, Iraqis no longer see the Americans as liberators. They see them as a giant ordeal that they had to live with and that they're glad to be rid of now. And I think a movie like this just plays into a perception among Iraqis that America never understood Iraq and perhaps never will.
Liz Sly, thanks so much for sharing the situation on the ground there. Nice to talk to you.
And we keep talking about all these different themes that the movie brings up. Some of them are obvious, some of them are not, and some of them we really haven't seen made manifest yet. For example, testimony begins this week in the murder trial for Chris Kyle's alleged killer. How will the movie affect the outcome of the trial? Now, the answer may not be what you think, and we'll tell you why. The so-called American Sniper trial begins this week. The defense says the trial needs to be moved in order to be fair. So that's one question. The other is, will the movie help or hurt defendant Eddie Ray Ralph? Here's CNN's Ed Lavandera with more.
Chris Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield brought Eddie Ray Ralph to the Rough Creek Lodge and Resort 2 years ago on a Saturday afternoon. Ralph's mother had reached out to Kyle to help her son. She said the former Marine was suffering from PTSD. Kyle and Littlefield took Ralph out to this gun range so they could talk and bond. But instead, police say Ralph turned the guns on the two men who were trying to help him. Police say Ralph left the scene in Kyle's pickup truck and drove to his sister's house right after the murders.
Yes, ma'am. My brother just came by here. He told me that he's committed a murder.
Who did he say he had killed?
He said that he killed two guys. They went out to a shooting range, and he's all crazy. He's psychotic.
Ralph is expected to plead not guilty by reason of insanity in the murders of Kyle and Littlefield. Ralph served 4 years in the Marines, including a tour of duty in Iraq and a humanitarian mission to help the victims of the devastating 2010 earthquake in Haiti. He reportedly made several visits to the VA hospital in Dallas and spent the 2 years before the murders in and out of treatment for mental health issues. Journalist Laura Beal wrote an in-depth account of Eddie Ray Ralph's struggles in a book called The Enemy Within. She says shortly before the murders, Ralph's mother turned to Kyle, desperate for help.
He had been saying crazy things and doing crazy things that were out of character long before this.
Ralph's trial will be held in Stephenville, Texas, the small town where Chris Kyle went to college in the early 1990s and where he entertained dreams of becoming a rodeo cowboy before he left that behind and joined the Navy. Ralph's attorney asked the judge to delay the start of the murder trial because of the intense publicity surrounding the release of the American Sniper movie.
The thing that haunts me are all the guys that I couldn't save.
And the state of Texas proclaiming February 2nd as Chris Kyle Day. The judge denied the request, and now the work of picking the jury is underway. Ed Lavandera, CNN, Stephenville, Texas.
Joining us now is Jeffrey Toobin. He's a CNN senior legal analyst, and Sunny Hostin, also a CNN legal analyst. They are both former federal prosecutors. Great to see both of you. Sunny, let me start with you. I was surprised to hear that the judge announced that the jury pool, anyone in it having seen the movie American Sniper or read Chris Kyle's book, that's not a disqualifier. They could still serve as jurors. Is that unusual?
I don't think it's necessarily unusual. I mean, you don't want a juror that's been living under a rock, right? I mean, this is a blockbuster film, and so most people have seen it. I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. And so I don't think that should automatically disqualify someone. What you want is a juror to be able to have seen the movie and read the book and still be open-minded as to the evidence that's coming in. And I think our jurors do a pretty good job of that.
And it's also, Jeffrey, not unusual in a high-profile trial, right? I mean, to hear something like this. Although counterbalancing that, this town where they're holding the trial, for 3 straight weeks, every showing of this movie was sold out. So that tells you something about the intensity of interest, but which way will that play out? What do you think on this?
I don't think it's a disqualifying factor. I understand why the judge didn't move the trial, didn't delay the trial. Most people don't follow the news as carefully as we do. So even though it's this is a very familiar case, there have been lots of cases involving a lot of publicity, and by and large, you can get jurors who, even if they've heard of the facts, they don't have a preconceived notion about what the verdict should be, and that's the important thing.
Sonny, one of the things they're exploring is whether or not the alleged shooter was insane. He was hospitalized at a mental institution before the shooting. Does that prove the case that he was mentally unstable.
Well, it doesn't necessarily prove that he was mentally unstable at the time of the shooting, right? But I've got to tell you, insanity defenses are rarely successful. They're not put forth that much. But if ever there was an insanity defense that could work, I think this is that case, because you have the history of PTSD. You also have this movie and this book that really, I think, outlines the difficulties of reintegrating into society after seeing this kind of violence.
That's interesting.
And war.
So, I mean, what you're saying basically is that the movie could work to the alleged shooter's advantage.
I do think so. I think that we are, as a society, just more cognizant now of the real trauma that our soldiers experience. And I think PTSD, given his history, is a real viable option for the defense.
And certainly Kyle, Jeffrey Toobin, if not Mr. Littlefield, was very invested in PTS and having people understand how bad it is and what it does. But what's on the other side of that analysis to why this guy may not get an insanity verdict?
Well, jurors are very reluctant to cut anyone a break who admittedly did something deeply, deeply horrible. And that's what's gone on here. I mean, we have someone who admittedly killed two human beings, and jurors understandably come to a case like that, and they are not filled with sympathy. The paradox here, of course, is that the worse his behavior, the more chance of an insanity defense, the more irrational, the more inexplicable. And here you also have the fact, not just of the movie, but of the VA scandals that have been going on for the past few months, where a jury might be predisposed to say, the VA really screwed up here. They're the ones who should have kept this guy medicated, locked up, protecting society.
VA failed to admit him in this situation as one of the allegations. But then again,
that's right.
You can have PTS and not be insane. Most people who struggle with PTS don't kill people, don't do things violent. Most of their anger is directed inwardly.
That's right. And I think that this is going to come down to sort of the battle of the experts. I think that if the defense does its job, which is to educate this jury on PTS and have the appropriate experts to discuss these issues. Maybe you don't have to have seen combat or be in combat to suffer from this. I really think they have a good chance at this insanity defense. And I rarely say that because it's so rarely successful. But if ever there was a case that it could work, I think this is the one.
Sonny Hostin, Jeffrey Toobin, thanks so much for your expertise. American Sniper highlights the battle our troops continue to fight when they come home, the battle, as we've been talking about, against post-traumatic stress. We're going to discuss this problem and some solutions with veteran war correspondent Bob Woodruff.
Thing that be there, but I'm not. I'm here. I quit.
You can walk down any hall in this hospital. We got plenty of soldiers need saving.
Mm-hmm.
Want to take a walk?
Sure.
That's the moment in American Sniper when Chris Kyle decides to dedicate his life to mentoring veterans, especially those suffering with post-traumatic stress. Now, the film's popularity and the upcoming trial of the Iraq War vet accused of killing Kyle and his friend have put PTS back in the spotlight.
So let's talk about it, and let's bring in the experts. Heidi Kraft is a former Navy clinical psychologist and author of Rule Number 2, Lessons I Learned in a Combat Hospital. Brandon Webb is a former Navy SEAL who helped train Chris Kyle. He's the author of Among Heroes. And Bob Woodruff is an ABC News anchor and co-founder of the Bob Woodruff Foundation. He was hit by a roadside bomb in 2006 while reporting on the Iraq War. It's great to have all of you here for this discussion. I want to start with you, Brandon, because you have a fascinating job. You were the head instructor in the Navy SEAL sniper program that trained Chris Kyle. And I'm wondering, is there a particular personality type that lends itself to becoming a sniper?
Yeah, I think the guys that really excel and as a sniper have an ability to really manage stress and make complex decisions under pressure, and we look for those candidates. And like you and I were talking earlier before the segment, we put them in situations to artificially induce very high levels of stress to see who has it and who doesn't.
And do you think that that somehow is a buffer against PTS when they come home?
I think the special operations community as a whole has a much lower rate or frequency of guys that don't deal with PTSD effectively. They show up to training and make it through because they have an ability to deal with adverse situations. And especially as a sniper, we look for those individuals that have those characteristics that can really deal with some terrible situations and be able to make these decisions very quickly and make complex calculations for wind and lead, and sometimes even the spin of the earth will factor into the shots at a longer distance.
But functioning, dealing, those two things, while very useful, are not coping. And Bob, you and I have known each other a long time. You've taken this very seriously for a long time. What have you seen in terms of whether you're a sniper or whether you're a cook? What happens for fighting men and women when they come back home and how it affects their family? What have you seen?
Well, a lot of it is what they saw, what they lived through. Absolutely, what kind of trauma was it that triggered it off? And then this transition when you go from a very different world of fighting in the war, where you don't really know where the so-called enemies are or where the weapons are. It kind of creates a stress, especially from these multiple deployments that all of ours that have served have gone through. But a lot of it depends on that transition, because they're going from a world where they get very close with their unit. They've got every day, they know pretty much what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. Then you come back into this gigantic world that's spread out, and a lot of times you don't know what to do. But I think most of it's linked back to the kind of trauma that you lived through, and then suddenly in a brand new world that's difficult to deal with.
Heidi, in the movie American Sniper, it makes it seem as though Chris Kyle did come back with PTS and that he was depressed, but then that he sort of found his calling by helping other soldiers who were suffering with PTS. And is that realistic? Can you come home and recover from PTS and sort of put it behind you?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. We have treatment for all kinds of trauma, both PTSD and everything on that continuum of symptoms that we know are very effective to help people. And for many of my patients and others who have gone through these kinds of situations, helping others and feeling like they are able to give back to their community and other people who might be in similar situations, it's really helpful. And it gives a great feeling of hope and looking forward and feeling like there's a greater sense of their being and what they're all about.
You have can versus do, though, right? And then do has two different layers. The first is, are you ready? Can you handle it? Do you want to admit it? Especially these types of men and women who already feel like they've put too much on their families, let alone add another layer of now I still have things to burden you with back home. And then it's whether the system takes care of them. Let's unpack that. How hard is it for someone to say, I can't handle this. There's something I can't handle.
Well, I don't think that's a problem, but to Heidi's point and to your point, I think that the national TS needs to change to one of more positive, solution-based approach. I hear lots of complaining about the Department of Veteran Affairs, and I think that's why myself and a lot of fellow veterans really take matters into our own hands. We start a foundation like Bob's foundation to really change the way that we set a positive example to these transitioning veterans. We had a thing in the sniper program. We took the way that we used to coach and teach from a very negative approach to a positive approach. And once we started changing the philosophy of the program, we saw a 30% failure rate go down to less than 3%.
And you've seen that
works.
too. You've seen that with the foundation. When you give the resources, when you make sure people know that they're there, people who are there for them, that they have a network, what kind of changes do you see?
Well, one of them, I think, Heidi mentioned that sometimes it's difficult, or you said that it's difficult for people sometimes to talk about it in the beginning. That has completely changed over time. That getting over this stigma, it was considered to be kind of unmanly to come back and say you've got PTSD. I think we've also, over time, looked at PTSD differently, but the fact that I think all of us don't really call it PTSD anymore. We take off the D, it's not the disorder. They don't want to be a disorder necessarily. And also, it doesn't really matter the kind of PTS you get when you're fighting in a war versus you witnessed one of your friend's child die right here in New York or something. It's the same kind of PTS, and I think that's one of the things that's changed over time. And in different ways. I think we've seen in the beginning, we were really caring about those in ICU, those who were just injured, and then we started help them when they go back to their communities, because nobody really know many veterans in their neighborhood, because we got just about 1% of Americans are serving in this war compared to previous wars that we had. And now we're really looking at as you said, veterans helping veterans, which is exactly what you're doing, because those have been incredibly efficient and effective to do this. You know, service dogs, you get some of these guys to come back and train service dogs to help others. It's helping them too. I have a good friend of ours who's done the same thing that we've backed, and he's not even taking the drugs he was taking before to deal with his PTS, because now he's training these dogs to help some of his friends. So it's working well now, and it's getting better as time goes on.
Heidi, the movie did a good job of also depicting just the trauma that the family back at home goes through while they're worried about the soldier overseas. What help is there for them?
There certainly are many programs that are trying to reach out to our families, but this is more difficult, of course, because it's harder to know where they are at any given time. I think there is a greater understanding now when we talk about PTS or PTSD, sort of how trauma can actually be spread across terrible and horrible things happening to someone you love as well, and that can still lead to those symptoms. So we are, I think, having a greater understanding now about all the people who might be involved in that soldier, Marine, sailor, airman's experience, and making sure that they're all sort of included when we talk about that picture. As a clinician, I certainly am always asking about the family. I want to know about everyone who might be affected by the experiences that my patient might have experienced.
And people have to want to help also, and that's why it's great to have people writing and being clinical the way Heidi is, and for you two gentlemen, the work that you do with your organizations, and Bob, I just love what you do, and that makes a difference because you're helping the right people. So thank you for helping us get the message out as well.
It's great to hear about all the progress being made. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll have some closing thoughts on American Sniper right after this break. American Sniper is the highest-grossing war movie in U.S. history. Chris Kyle's story has clearly struck a chord with millions of people. Some call it war propaganda. Others believe the film is patriotic, not political, and it serves to celebrate the bravery of our men and women in uniform.
And yet the movie itself probably isn't what matters most. It's what remains. The families, the missing moms and dads, sons and daughters, and the battles that continue when they come home, especially the plague of PTS. So if you want, you can forget the politics of the film, but please do not forget what matters most, helping our troops. And thank you for watching. CNN Tonight with Don Lemon begins right now.